Thank you for that beautiful reading, Alaya. And now I want to welcome Megan Alexandra to the stage to conduct the post-reading conversation. Megan writes about shape-shifting spiders, foul-mouthed grannies, well-meaning liars, and sacrilege. She's from Queens, New York. So I'm turning it over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, so can you hear me? Yes, excellent. So you tell stories. I'm changing the order of my questions actually based on your reading. You tell stories in the historical past and the projected future, but where does most of your literary imagination reside? In the past, present, and or future?
I feel like it's always wandering around, it doesn't have like a fixed abode. I would say when I was younger, I definitely gravitated more towards fantasy and kind of fantasy in this very traditional sort of high fantasy in sort of analogs of the past. But certainly for the last decade at least, I've been really fascinated by the potential of future set science fiction. And I'm not sure this means that I'm like, my mind is sort of wandering in the future so much as I'm trying to explore ways, like the different ways that humans interact with one another and our environments and these themes of exploitation and colonization that kind of permeate my work. And I realized that I had a certain amount of freedom in the future that I think I didn't quite have in the past. The past isn't, on some level it's set, on some level it's not set because we have imperfect knowledge of the past, right? So that space of that imperfect knowledge is where a lot of fantasy can go. But I think I found this maybe a slightly broader canvas in the future, in these galactic civilizations and AI gods, and I sort of deliberately maximized the scope of what I was doing with the Library of Broken Worlds in a way that I'd never done before. And so that, I feel like, and that's something I still want to keep doing, like I have a lot more ideas. And so I guess maybe now I'm more in the future, but I still think about the past, and I'm actually researching a novel about pre-Hispanic Mexico. So I haven't left it, but I'm sort of in between those two. I don't know if they're two poles really, but different modes of thinking about the speculative. Yeah.
It was a trick question actually, because I feel like in speculative writing, it's all three. It's past, present, and future. And we were talking earlier about Ursula K. Guin and her saying that science fiction is not predictive.
Yeah.
You can say more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love that. Yeah, it is a trick question because really it's all about the present. Okay, spoiler alert. Like this is all about right now. That's what I'm writing about. I'm just using different tools to get at different aspects of it. So yeah, what we're talking about is Ursula Le Guin kind of has a huge outsized impact on science fiction and fantasy genres, Wizard of Earthsea and Left Hand of Darkness. I mean, not many people manage to do it in like both sides, kind of the speculative universe. But she has this idea that, really specifically that science fiction is not predictive. And if it happens to manage to predict something, that's fine, but that's not its job, right? It's about using tools of speculation or creating imagined futures, which might not be relatively probable in order to reflect some aspect of our present reality in some way. And so this was forefront in my mind with the Library of Broken Worlds in particular, because I really wanted to have a canvas large enough to dig into these issues of war and peace and what it means to have a peace of mutual destruction, a peace following a great war, how different people are never allowed peace, whereas other people are. All of those questions are things that are happening right now. And there's a lot of resonances in just what I just read, probably, that you heard to events that are going on right now. And they're not deliberate in a one-to-one sense. I'm not writing just like a straight up allegory of any kind of current world conflict, but that's exactly what the magic of speculative fiction does. It allows you to extract certain themes from the mess of maybe the modern, current world and look at them and hopefully have different insights about them, right?
Okay, so like genre, as I feel like as a speculative writer myself, and you obviously are, there's this there's a reason why we're drawn to this, not writing in the practical, real world we experience it. So what are the affordances of like writing in cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic fiction and urban fantasy, magical realism? Like, what are the affordances of writing this novel in a science fiction context as opposed to writing it?
Right.
We're in Queens, Oxina Boulevard.
I mean, and you can, right?
You can,
I mean,
right,
that can, but I do
why
think,
do you?
why am I drawn to it? I think a lot, like me and a lot of writers from marginalized backgrounds, like Black writers in particular, are like really drawn to these tools, partly because I think the experience of marginalization, historical marginalization, is fundamentally science fictional. It doesn't feel like something that our everyday language has the tools to even get at. I mean, if you study or just read even a little bit about like the real lived reality of indigenous people in the Americas during the colonial era, I mean, you have a word for that that's not just alien invasion? Is there a better way of talking about it? I mean, these people come from across the ocean and destroy everything they touch. I mean, 98% death rates, over the course of the century after colonization. I mean, just these figures that it is hard for us to even be able to grasp or come to terms with. And I think that the tools of mimetic realism aren't really up to the task of getting at a lot of our experiences. So I think there is a really strong reason for that, absolutely. And people also talk about speculative fiction as an escape or a way of kind of leaving our everyday world. And I do think that's also true and can be important, but I think in my writing, it's less escape than finally being able to grapple with things,
right.
than finally being able to actually like tell the truth in a way by lying, which is what fiction is anyway.
Well, like calling slavery an apocalypse.
Yeah,
right. Like,
exactly.
These experiences are apocalyptic, so writing in the genre isn't so out of tune with the content, I guess, that we're thinking about.
Exactly. Like all of the content, the ways of thinking about the world. I mean, another thing is people talk to, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, like, you're writing magical realism, and he would say, what you guys are calling magical realism is just realism. Like that's the way that like I experience the world. Like, and it's kind of, I feel like coming from a certain context, it can be hard to understand that, and then being in a different context, like living in Mexico for the last decade, I feel like I have understood that so much more. And it's not just, okay, what's possible and what's possible. It's ways of thinking about the things that we all see and that we experience or that we could see and experience. What are the things that you notice? What are the things that you don't notice? Like, what are the things that you decide aren't important? Those are questions of power, and those questions of power kind of remit at magic. And I don't think that means I have to be saying, like, ontologically magic is possible. I'm talking about it more in our worldview, in our way of seeing the world. Those things seem like magic. Yeah. But if you're in a different context, that's not what they seem like.
So, like, as you, when you sit down to write a book or begin a project, right, you have, like, speculative fiction is so broad. I don't think people know how much it actually fits into this very, very broad category. And I wonder if you have a process to eliminate, because I have this issue, because I want to write everything, you know?
Right.
And I don't know, like, how do you like narrow down, doing cyberpunk versus magical realism, which is more fantasy?
Yeah. All right. I think the short answer is I don't.
Yeah. Okay.
I try to maximize the amount, like everything I do. I'm like, how can I expand or twist or move this around so that it could contain as many of the ideas I've had floating around my head as possible. So this novel, for example, has kind of nested stories that are folklore. It has the short story that I read to you guys right now, which is more like very straight, like colonization science fiction. It has this is Scheherazade-like frame story of the main character narrating her life to this AI god. It has this coming of age romance. I mean, it's got a lot of stuff. And so I wanted to do that. Yeah. I wanted to, I don't know if this is, a winning method for sales or anything, but I like exploring things,
Right.
So so in terms of whittling it down, I mean, eventually I do have to think about the shape of the story I'm telling. You know, eventually I have to decide, okay, like this thing that as cool as it is not actually work with the story I want to tell, you know. So, but I feel like they tend to fall off on their own because I start to get so immersed in the world and so immersed in the character. And so, you know, that happens with all of my novels, you know, where the world and the characters just start to dictate what I need to use, what isn't as good to use, or what I can repurpose, you know. And so I think at that point I stop thinking about genre in that more abstract way. I feel like it's useful to talk about books that already exist, but when you're creating, I think it's a bit more of an internal dialogue of just what is the story asking for, you know. And I think this, you know, stories, when you're really deep in them, they tell you.
Yeah, like what does the character want to be in? A romance, a horror story, like a mystery? Yeah, okay, I see that.
Yeah. Or you know, maybe it could start in one and end in the other. Lord knows I like doing that. But I mean, but it's to a purpose usually, you know.
So like on that note, thinking about romance, because I think, again, speculative fiction, I feel like I'm so happy that you're here because, you know, we don't often get the appreciation in the literary world. I feel like we just, that I think we've earned as writers and thinkers and people who we look to. Another genre that we kind of don't focus on much is romance. And romance is big in all of your works, well, the ones I've read at least. Yeah. Right? So like what's your advice for writing romance? And like as a way that's like part of a literary work, not like just an add-on. It's like integral to it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is a sort of sad after effect of just patriarchy and institutional sexism. I mean, we've assigned romance like this sort of denigrating asterisk after it, you know, so that everybody who wants to write a romantic story has to, you know, justify what they're doing or, you know, write horrifying sex scenes or something, you know, so they, you know, to make it seem more literary and serious. And I don't believe in that. I mean, I love romance. I started reading romantic novels, I would say. I mean, now we're in a bit of a complication in terms of like the literary category versus the marketing category, right? I mean, I would describe romance as stories that are romantic. Like that seems reasonable to me, you know, like Romeo and Juliet's a romance. But it's hard to now use that term for older stories of romance, which do not necessarily end happily ever after and might have kind of weirder nuances in them that right now, like the marketing category isn't really open to. But in general, I mean, books that are written in that marketing category of romance or books that are written outside of it, I mean, I think both of them suffer from that problem of this sort of suspicious side eye given to characters loving one another in some way, you know? And I don't know. I don't think I'll ever stop loving it or writing it. It's integral to everything I write, including this novel. This novel probably has a bit less of it than my others, but not because it was less important to me, just because there was so much other stuff I wanted to write as well. But I also like exploring its different permutations. You know, especially writing young adult. You know, I feel that it's really important to have space for, you know, young adult characters who are exploring their sexuality, who are falling in love and then maybe screw it up and, you know, or then have a different relationship, you know, which sorry, I'm kind of spoiling this novel, but, you know, there's a couple of, you know, I sort of attempt to have different ways of experiencing romance. Or in Trouble with the Saints, I had, you know, this like very kind of intense, headlong romantic connection that had, you know, they'd been broken up for 10 years when the story starts, you know, so that there's a lot of the different permutations. But I think that kind of intense human connection is something that I love in general, even if it's not romantic, but that romantic connection I find just endlessly compelling. So why would I look askance at it? I mean, it's just like another fabulous thread in the rich tapestry that I'm creating, you know?
Right, like it's part of the human experience. Love is integral to the human experience. So as a teacher, as well as a writer, how would you like, I don't know, how would you like teach romance writing? What advice do you have for students who want to, or are afraid to ask maybe in the classroom? Like I want to have a love story in my book, but I don't think it's literary enough.
Right.
So like, what advice would you give them to like, you know,
I mean, I think my biggest advice is any great romance is rooted in character. You know, so if you especially if you want to center that, I think character is important no matter what. Okay, but especially romance, you need to create two characters whose internal makeup makes it obvious, like their compatibility, the reason for them to be together, as well as the reasons and the conflicts and the complications that are going to keep them apart. I don't think it's anywhere near as satisfying to have a romance that's just two people madly in love and forces outside their control keep them apart. I mean, you can do it, but it's just not as it's not as satisfying because at the end of the day, you know, usually in a modern setting that starts to feel kind of unbelievable. So you kind of usually have to come up with some sort of external structure that's going to really keep them apart. But I think also if you dig down into even, you know, she's a princess in a tower, he's a lowly peasant boy, whatever. Even then, you're going to find conflicts in their actual characters that are going to be maintaining that separation, where she's a little snobby and he's, you know, doesn't respect her that much because she hasn't done anything in her life. You know, I mean, there's going to have those issues, and actually dealing with that instead of focusing on the external stuff, I think will deepen the romance so much. Because to me, the stuff that makes romance so compelling is how do two people decide to change themselves to be with one another? I'm right. I mean, like no successful relationship happens without two people deciding they're going to do a lot of work to make it work. I don't think that happens. So that story is endlessly fascinating. I mean, I could just do it over and over again for the rest of my life. I probably will. Like, I just love it.
Thank you. Do we have time? Is it time for audience questions? Yes. Okay. Do you have any questions for Alaya today?
So I was going to ask that you seem to view sci-fi and fantasy as two sides of the same coin. I was wondering if you've ever felt like those genres were at odds with each other, and whether you prefer to overlap them, and what are the strengths of both that you enjoy working with them?
Okay, yeah, awesome question. So the question is about, like, do I think that, you know, I talk about science fiction and fantasy like they're just part of one happy family, but do I sometimes see that they might be in conflict with one another, or, you know, how can I make them work together? I feel that they are two sides of the same coin. In fact, I have at one point sort of controversially attempted to claim that science fiction is just a subgenre of fantasy. I mean, I'm not sure I believe that, but I like saying it just to like piss off a certain cohort of people, and that is the cohort of people that tend to elevate science fiction over fantasy. Again, for gendered reasons that I don't buy. There's absolutely nothing necessarily more rigorous, hard about science fiction than fantasy. I mean, they're just different ways of accessing the speculative mode of writing, and so I don't see any conflict there. And I think that our world is better and happier for a kind of wider acceptance of those subgenres and the funny slipstreamy places between them. But for social reasons, I do think they often are pitted against one another. They do have a bit of a dichotomy. Like, you're much more likely to get a review in the Times for a science fiction novel than a fantasy novel, things like that. But I mean, I don't think that reflects the actual literary quality. No.
Mine is just about titles, how you come up with titles, because in particular, I think Trouble the Saints and Library Broken Worlds are so, like, they're so enticing, they're so evocative, and so I was just wondering how you go about coming up with titles for your work.
So the question is, how does Alaya make evocative titles for her works?
Long, horrifying conversations with my editorial team and publicist and agent. I know that is not the romantic answer you wanted, but in those cases of Trouble the Saints and the Library of Broken Worlds, like boy, you should see those email chains. It's just nothing but me going like, why are you doing this to me? The Trouble the Saints, the title, like for most of the many years I was working on it, was called P Triptych. That was a title. Yep, that was like going to be a winner over there. And the Library of Broken Worlds was called Freda Novel. You know, so I did not know what to do with these titles. Sometimes that's not true. The Summer Prince, I had the title from the second I wrote the first line, through all the drafts, and I turned it in, and nobody ever suggested changing it. That was the title. But yeah, I feel like especially Trouble the Saints. Now it feels like the title it always had, but I cannot convey to you. It was months and months and months of going back and forth and me just crying. And it was like our fifth choice on a list. It was like the only one I could live with. And then as soon as we selected it, I thought, oh, this is a great title. So I don't know. It's weird. Sometimes titles are complicated. They have to do so many different things. It's not just beautifully encapsulating your novel, right? Because that could be one thing, but it also has to hit certain marketing parameters. It has to sound like the title of the book that you wrote in a marketing sense, right? So some titles, it also has to be able to be pronounced quickly in a way that people will hear it and understand it. So there's some words that just aren't that great. Like one of the suggestions for Library of Broken Worlds, which I laughed about a lot, was called A Precipice of Light. And my friend, who's a librettist, wrote to me, I thought I saw a precipice. Like, I thought I saw a pussycat. Anyway, the point is, it just doesn't sound like a word that you want to keep saying over and over and over again. Like, the more I would say precipice, the worse it sounded. So, and if you just read it once, it doesn't sound bad. But those are the sorts of questions that you start to ask yourself, which they seem like have nothing to do with creation and art. And, I can't imagine Keats worrying about like the titles of his poems in this way, but it's part of our modern literary infrastructure.
Like to write more scientific fiction novels like this that you wrote tonight, and how long did it took you to write that novel that you read?
So the question is, do you want to write more, I guess, like a hard science fiction, with more scientific research perhaps in the future?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so into this now. I started reading, Lord knows what occurred to me to do this, but I started reading philosophy of science in order to construct certain aspects of the world building in Library of Broken Worlds, which it took me about 7 or 8 years. I don't write all my novels exactly concurrently. Like, I'll write a draft and then it'll sit for a year and then I'll come back. But it was about 7 or 8 years of drafting and redrafting. And this, I did basically a page one rewrite on. I had a draft. It was like a skeleton outline of the novel, and I just rewrote the whole book. And in the process of the rewriting the whole book, I ended up doing a ton of more scientific research, and I got really into the philosophical implications of quantum mechanics and, things like Everettian many worlds theory versus the collapsing of the wave function and stuff, which, a lot of science fiction writers are playing around with those ideas, but I had this idea of using that as the basis of a religious system, which is in the book. And so that really kind of inspired a lot more like rigorous thinking. And so I've just kept up with this, and now I have so many ideas and I want to express them. So right now I'm extremely in love with science. So I think, I want to keep doing it.
So are you the type of person who is better coming up with ideas, or are you the type of person who is better at building off of those existing ideas? And how do you if it's the gaining ideas, what would you say is biggest help? I know that the ideas are supposed to come to you, but it's how does that part of the brain work?
Mm-hmm.
So do your ideas come organically, just as coming out of you, or are you inspired by outside influences?
Right, my process of idea making. So I always compare my sort of process of idea creation to a compost heap. My brain is a compost heap, and it needs lots of random dirt and scraps to be healthy and alive. So I read books about all sorts of things. I read science articles, I read historical accounts, I love traveling, learning Spanish now, which is the language I speak with my partner, and living in Mexico totally gave me just piles and piles from my compost heap. Going to school again gave me lots more. I just always try to make sure that I am giving myself the gift of a wide variety of influences, and I'm not only kind of reifying the stuff that I already know or that I'm familiar with. So, I need to have that frisson of being a little off kilter and confused and not quite understanding things in order to trigger, I think, my creative process. And usually if I do that, the ideas pop out, like little seedlings. And it might just be one idea, and then over here there's like another little seedling, and then I'll get a nice crop, and I'll try to, now my metaphor is falling apart. Okay, but I try to put them together, okay, and I'll try to figure out like how many I can like stuff in my salad or whatever. Okay, I'm so sorry about this metaphor. And I will see if it works, okay? And then eventually, at some point, they start to cohere. Now, this sounds kind of mechanical. I would say that's basically the way, say, the Summer Prints came to be. The Library of Broken Worlds, on the other hand, started with like a very sharp image. I mean, like it came to me like a vision while I was needing to edit my other novel that I was extremely late on. So like many ideas, if you need to be doing something else, I promise you they'll come. So, I got this idea, and it was just this stark image of this young woman walking across a desert by herself, and she was fleeing from her home. She did not want to leave, and she was going to something she was pretty sure was going to kill her. And that her home was a place called the library, and the thing that she was pretty sure was going to kill her was a god of some kind. That was the image, and it was years before I could even kind of like think more about that image, but it stayed with me, and it stayed with me. And I started to develop, it was as if I were just like unveiling it, although I know that's not, that's what it felt like, okay? I'm not trying to imply anything mystical here, but it just felt like I was digging around to figure out what the library was and what the Namarin was and why she was in the desert. And the more I dug, the deeper the story got. And that's why I think it's so important to have like the compost heap in your brain, because if I didn't have all of that other stuff just sort of rooting around in there while I was sleeping, I wouldn't have had enough to populate those other spaces, because that central image was so strong. And I knew I just basically constructed this entire novel around it. And it's still, an incredibly powerful image. It's probably like this, it's one of the anchoring images of the novel. So, it's a little bit of one, a little bit of the, there's a lot of different ways anyone can get ideas. I just think the most important thing is to not wait around for fabulous inspiration, though it can, of course, strike. It's to, like, give, there's this phrase, I can't remember who said it, that inspiration is real, but it happens while your butt is in your chair and you're working. So, like, you just have to keep working, and eventually something is going to happen.
So the question is, at what age did you want to be a writer, and like, what was your like process for becoming?
Yeah, I'm one of those weirdos who wanted to be a writer as soon as I figured out what a novel was, and I was about 5 or 6 when I realized what a novel was. My mom taught me to read at, again, a weird age. I guess I must have just been asking her. I wanted to read. I liked the idea of words. I wanted to know what they were. So I remember sitting in the closet, and she had these little note cards. And, it's like, so once I finally figure out, I figured out the system, okay, I can read bed and read or whatever. I was like, okay, I can read, sounds great. And I just like went straight to novels. I was like 3, right? And then around, like I said, I just kind of, my parents must have given me some kind of illustrated copy of The Secret Garden. Couldn't read the thing. I still have this copy of this book, and my dad, I remember, told me to circle all the words I didn't know, and the first few pages of this book are like, nothing but circles. It's just like my tiny little pencil going like, I think I even put a circle around because. What business did I have reading The Secret Garden when I did not know what because meant? I don't know. But I just have this memory of like just trying to read it and then reading it again and then trying to read it again, and eventually a couple of years later it like worked out and I more or less understood it. that was I was hooked. I needed to write novels. I don't know why. I've always wanted to write novels.
All right, so the question is, what were you thinking about when you made the curriculum for your class? What class are you teaching? Like, it might be helpful too. What do you want your students to kind of take away?
Yeah, so I have a couple of my students here, and basically the curriculum for the speculative fiction class I'm teaching is it's about narrating displacement through speculative fiction. So basically I just use that as a theme of general like displacement, movement, kind of what we were talking about, how speculative fiction allows us to grasp certain themes like immigration, like refugees, like war and displacement and all of those things in kind of different ways. And so I picked 5 books that I just love and that have an interesting thing to say about it. And basically, like, my idea is to read Le Guin, you know, to Sofia Samatar is a brilliant fantasy writer, just speaking of that kind of false dichotomy between like hard, you know, literary SF and like silly fantasy. I mean, one of the best speculative novels of the 21st century is A Stranger in Alondria by Sofia Samatar, and it's fantasy. Just absolutely brilliant. And you know, so these are just books I love, and I love being able to dig into them with my students and actually just think in a writerly way about how we analyze the techniques that they're using. I mean, I'm big into analyzing things anyway. My brain likes doing that. But I had to say I haven't previously had that much of a reason to go as deep into the structure and the techniques of these writers of books that I love. And when you do that, I mean, just all these worlds get revealed, you know. So I mean, to me, it's super inspiring for me right now as a writer, and I hope it is for the students also.
We were talking earlier about speculative fiction giving you like a bigger canvas to think about the contemporary in ways outside of how we normally think about it. And I'm thinking about the Library of Broken Worlds, like on a mass scale. First of all, like, you know, it's easy to say like colonization is bad or I'm against war, but you have the way you set it up, it's like there are multiple groups in violent conflict with each other in various directions. So it's like very complicated, or in like a simple way, like the first physical encounter between the lovers in this book is like, at first it almost seems like it's the female character is experiencing violence, but then it turns out to be, you know, it would be easy to reduce it to this like gender, very like, you know, just gender narrative that is very familiar, but it becomes unfamiliar. And I'm wondering, like, does that just come out in the writing, or is it like something you think about trying to do, and also like how does it reflect your belief system? I don't know, things like that.
Ooh, how to summarize that?
This is just like, why are my books so complicated? Yes. I mean, okay, like to do justice. Why do I complicate the dynamics of the stories, even when I'm generally trying to talk about like the evil of war? I'm like always doing something to undermine like the simple, these are the good guys and these are the bad guys. I'm always doing something to undermine colonialist dynamics, not undermine like how they work, but to actually show, and this is to answer your question, I am trying to show how they actually function in our world, at least a little more. Yeah, I'm abstracting it a little bit, I'm simplifying it a little, but I don't want to do it too much. It's really important to me to allow the space for that complication, for those weird twists, for the fact that this group was exploiting this group, but they were also exploited by another group, and then there's all these historical realities that have now kind of gotten locked in, and you can't easily separate them no matter what the historical truth was, you know, 500 years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I needed that in the story because otherwise I felt that I was just creating something too simplistic to be useful, at least to me. Okay, like I don't like it if it's too simple, because what am I going to take away? I come back to my world, right? And it's like, I know that that stuff isn't that simple. I know that it's not enough to say colonialism is bad. You know, I mean, yeah, sure. But like, that's a really simple, basic statement. And there's a lot of conflict and a lot of conflicting and driving factors beneath that. And no, I can't dig into all of that. I'm not writing, you know, there's a part of me that would almost like to just sort of write an anthropological paper set like of someone living in this world, just about like one conflict, just to see how deep I can go into it. But that's not actually like my goal as a writer. My goal as a writer is to at least hint at those complications, and to make at certain level, let's say like real life goes down to infinity and like the simplest explanation is like a 1. I'm usually trying to at least like allow my characters to hang out in levels like 2 through 10. You know, like I'm not trying to get down too in the weeds, but if I leave it too close to the surface, it just doesn't it doesn't have roots. It doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel emotionally believable. And my characters don't live in the same way that they can live in a world with, you know, if we mentioned this like a simulated world, like it's got to have enough like the pixels, you know, like they have to be, you know, fine enough for you to actually like feel that it's actually happening. So, I mean, that's why. But it's hard to do, and I don't necessarily recommend it for sales. But you know, it takes a lot of time. That's why the rewriting, the page 1 rewrite was all that. All of that complication was basically, it was hinted at in the first draft, and the rewrite was, how can I make this feel lived in? And so many things came out of that. Like, speak to the other question about my ideas. I mean, just came out naturally, as if they'd already been there. Like, I literally was just writing this world, and all of these different aspects, like the system of they're not called freeloaders, no, I can't, free homesteaders, a system of homesteaders in the library city, you know, so these groups of independent, kind of semi-autonomous groups that use the natural AI ecosystem of the library to kind of grow their own homes and their own food, and they kind of live outside of the governmental structure of library city. Like, all of that just came out of me deepening the world building in a totally other area, like an area that I thought had nothing to do with that, and it just seemed, I just realized that this part needed this part, you know.
I think, I mean, it's complicated because it is complicated, which is not, you know, profound maybe to say, but I think that's an answer. The life is complicated, and so these genres are like, if done to the full affordances of speculative fiction, I think it can, I don't know, I think it can be a great mirror of our society.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
so,
to be a mirror, it has to be able to reflect enough.
yes, like the truth of it and the complications of it.
Exactly.
Well, thank you. Yes, I think that's all we have for this evening. Thank you for being here. And yeah, round of applause.